Hey everyone. I just wanted to give a bit of a take on the new Evan Spiegel Snap VR glasses. And I'm going to start trying to do this more where I kind of give commentary over what's happening in the news cycle, just using Fobi as the backdrop here. So he's been getting ragged on for this new product release. And I think there's more to it that I wanted to share. So as some of you may have seen, Snapchat released these new specs, and there was a video of the founder kind of talking about them on the news and saying that the world is like glued to screens, and wouldn't it be great if they interacted more in real life? And obviously there's a lot of criticism given the fact that he's got two giant screens strapped to his eyeballs. But I actually think the product story here is way more interesting. Obviously Snap has an AR division. They have a long history in AR and VR, and unfortunately their stock performance as a result of this focus on VR and AR hasn't been the best. But I do think that they're making really interesting developments. So just to kind of give context, like this is what those glasses look like. Obviously there is actually a wire which tethers to a external power, which is how a lot of these mixed reality glasses are being positioned. And then obviously once you get this in the hand of some marketers and they do a job of like showing how this could look on people's faces. Like as far as frontier tech is in this mixed reality space, I don't think these are that bad. Now, obviously they're still huge and most people are never going to wear these like out and about. But I think the thing to focus on more than anything is that these have a kind of different use case where we're layering information over the top of real life. And this would typically only be for virtual reality, right? So you're like none of the standard kind of just glasses versions of this, like a Meta's product, have the level of capability that these have. And I think if you think about a future where you're walking into a bookshop and then you pick up a book and you can watch a couple of videos from the author before you decide if it's worth buying. When you walk down the street and all of a sudden you can tap on a building and it transforms you back in time to a historic moment from like wherever you are, or just layering information over the top of real life in ways which is much more engaging and useful. I think that's a pretty compelling future. And I think this is going some way to getting us there. Of course, it's not prime time ready just yet, but I do think that they should get credit for pushing the technology in this way. So like, here's an example, right? If somebody playing basketball and then they're seeing the trajectory of their shot, you could imagine like literally a million use cases where this could potentially be useful. I think one of the things that unfortunately Snap have struggled with is they do have some Chinese competitors which are producing these at a much lower price. So here on Fobi, you can see that I can compare between Snap and Xreal, and they've only raised like $500 million versus over $6 billion from Snap. Admittedly, their market caps are reflective of that. But basically, Xreal have their own version of a very similar product that is, this mixed reality headset that, like for all intensive purposes, is very, very similar to Snap's version and kind of similar in form factor. The difference being that rather than $2,500, you can pick these up for $600. Now, as a developer, I'm going to pick up the $600 pair and play around with that most likely. From my understanding, these aren't as capable, and these are primarily being used to kind of plug into existing ways of using technology, so thinking about them as just like a large external monitor for gaming and things like that. But even like in the world of vibe coding, like being able to see your code and then just speak directly to it as opposed to have to be stuck at your desk all day, I do think there is some compelling use cases. When we compare this to the market, again, this is where I think these are interesting, is to get this level of capability, you're literally looking at Apple's Vision Pro, you're looking at the Oculus. Obviously, those are like much more capable given their form factors. But I think this is going some way to showing like where the future could potentially go. Other people that are doing reduced form factors like Lucid, for example, which is a company I was unfamiliar with until I started tracking it on Fobi. But these guys will use agents and small amounts of camera technology to layer in information on top of the real world in a like much more subtle way. And obviously these are much more consumer friendly, just given their form factor. But in terms of capabilities, you're talking to an AI agent and maybe it can see what you're doing, but there's really nothing more there. And a similar company is this other one called Brilliant Labs. And again, they're kind of focusing on this idea of the agent being an augmented layer where it can see what you're looking at and then you could ask it questions, which for the record, I do think is also super compelling. Like you can get a lot of really interesting experiences just through doing that. But I think the real breakthroughs and where this technology could become transformational is once you start layering information over real life, which again, I think Snap deserves a lot of credit for being pioneers in that space. Previously, you had a company called Magic Leap, and they've actually pivoted from consumer AR into headsets for surgical and industrial use cases. So now when you go on their website, it looks nothing like it used to. It used to be this kind of quite beautiful consumer website, and now it's all about the lenses. And obviously, this is probably due to the fact that they raised a ton of money and weren't able to sell enough to be sustainable, which is a real shame because, again, they were doing really compelling demos around where this technology could go in the future. So, and then similarly with the Microsoft HoloLens, like you're noticing a lot of these technologies are being used for B2B because that justifies the cost of the headset if it's making efficiencies from a business perspective. But again, all this to say, I do think that the consumer story is super compelling if we imagine a future in which the form factor of these does get reduced down to a place where they are incredibly wearable, so closer to what Meta is doing today, but with more utility. And so, yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Obviously, this is going to get ragged on. I don't think they're going to sell a tremendous amount, admittedly, at the cost, but I'm still impressed with the technology and what it potentially opens up. I am thinking about, just because I'm playing around so much with vibe coding, of actually getting a pair of AR glasses myself to start developing on, just to play around with the tech. So if anybody out there is already doing so, I'd be curious to get your perspective on which are the best platforms to play with today. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks everyone. Appreciate you. Speak soon.